Okay.
Who's that?
Yeah. What's
Lady.
that?
Who's that in the background? There was somebody in the background behind you.
Oh, that's my dad's office. So probably my dad. I'm outside on the patio. That's probably my dad. Yeah. Um, I liked your idea to talk about mattering yesterday.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to tie the two main things that it seems like we wanted to talk about, which is that one and white privilege. So
Hmm.
mattering and white privilege, I think that those two go together.
Hmm.
So, do you want me to start?
Yeah, you had a really good description of what prompted you to start thinking about mattering, and I'd love if you described that again, and we could start from there.
Maybe you can remind me what I said. Um, I mean, there's like a number of ways that it kind of started, but yeah, can you remind me what it is that I told you?
Yeah, there was a piece of it. You started an online discussion that was really about how do people show themselves that they matter and that they're important. And essentially, in a way, it's like a twist on the conversation we're having in the broader social sense about self-love, self-care, and sort of the core ideas that we hold about ourselves. And so sometimes the core idea is that we matter, sometimes the core idea is that we don't matter. So the question was like, how do we orient around that question of do we matter, and how do we show ourselves that we matter? How do we take care of ourselves in ways that demonstrate that we matter?
Yeah, yeah. So I think for me, one of the things that I asked myself, in response to this movement that has been around for a while now, calling themselves Black Lives Matter. And
Mm.
I've been thinking about what are the obstacles to mattering? What does it mean to matter? And, yeah, a lot of it is kind of what you were saying or reminded me that I said about, um, well, how do you show yourself that you matter? And
Mm.
for me, I've been reflecting a lot about that, just in relation to my overall self-care and what I consider self-care. And that's, talking about not only just talking about giving myself long baths and, monthly massages, but financially, are my stable? Um, that's a huge one. Um, and also, am I optimizing my health? Or am I, going to sleep at the times that I should go to sleep and waking up at a good time? Things like that. A lot of little decisions actually speak volumes as to whether you feel in an embodied way that you matter. One thing that I learned in my healing journey is that the body really understands one main language, and that's action. Your mind, you can talk to it, you can maybe do subconscious programming and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, if you want to program your body to react differently, that can only really be done through actions. So, and I think that mattering is something that is both uh, intrinsic inside of you, like you know, it's coming out of you, and also it's reflected to you by the world, right? Like the world tells certain people in a myriad of ways and through actions, right, that they matter more than others.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be you pay certain people more than others. You have them in commercials and not in others, and not other people, right? So that's kind of how, and then that kind of leads me to talking a lot about privilege, because for me privilege is in many ways being taught that you matter and acting as such. When a person, you know, we hear this term often described to often used to describe white people or just people who are privileged, and that is entitled. And being entitled means that you, on some level, believe that you deserve something. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Um, I think people obviously mean something else when they say that people are entitled. Um, that is a negative connotation, but I think that there's a positive way to look at entitlement, which is basically you have high expectations for what you should be for your life, and and I think that, you know, for a lot of people that's something that they could that would benefit them to have those higher expectations.
Like
um
there's a piece there around context, that context matters, you know,
mhm,
like is the expectation around someone expecting that they, for example, Elizabeth Gilbert calls this something, the arrogance of belonging. She actually quotes another author, but she says the arrogance of belonging. And in that way, entitlement is something that everybody can access and resonate with. It's the
mhm,
feeling that no matter who I am or where I come from, that I deserve, that I'm entitled to a sense of belonging. So it's
mhm.
like in that way, entitlement could be something that everybody has access to or could have access to, is deserving of, like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
um yeah, and I don't know about you, but yeah, there's, to me, that word deserving is pretty loaded. There's a lot there, you know,
Mm.
to feel when somebody says, like, you feel like you deserve love, you know, intellectually you may, or on the surface level, you maybe think you can, but that you do deserve love. But then, you know, there's like, there's wounds and things like that that make it so that many of us, on a deep level, don't feel like we deserve good things in our life, you know?
Mm. Yeah, the word deserving kind of feels similar or akin to the word entitled, and that it's loaded.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's a really good word for it. It makes me think of, you know, it's I'm having sort of a lot of colliding thoughts at this moment. First of all, because the lead up to this part of the conversation was so rich, the idea that around self-care and self-love and how we've sort of cultivated, I just want to revisit that for a second, because we've sort of cultivated the idea of self-care and self-love in a really material way, where now it almost serves these sort of capitalist functions of, in order to care for myself, I'm going to buy myself a bottle of wine and a bath bomb and give myself some self-care time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, and that this idea that we can purchase self-love and self-care really, I think, has come to, you know, it's sort of, the self-care and self-love has sort of been usurped by the capitalist functions of our society. Um, So it's really radical to reorient ourselves around self-care in ways that you were talking about that are more subtle. Like, am I in control of my own finances? Can I give myself the gift of feeling deeply stable? What gives me deep stability or security? Can I reflect on that, and reorient around that? Can I sit down and meditate at 5 in the morning every day, even though it sucks to get up that early? Can I do that because that's what ultimately serves me and feels really good on a deep level?
Yeah.
Self-care is not, I had a long day, so I mean, it can be. I'm not suggesting that some people don't relate to this, but it's not like, oh, I'm going to treat myself to that chocolate cake because, I deserve it because I had a hard day. It's self-care, I feel, is more about, I'm going to eat well every day. And even though I'm really tempted by that chocolate cake, or maybe I'm going to make my own chocolate cake, with healthier ingredients, or, sort of orienting around deep nourishment instead of this sort of superficial sense of self-love that we've been sold, that's been
Yeah.
repackaged by capitalism and then sold back to us.
Yeah. Um, Something that I've been talking to a lot of people about, and I was mentioning it in one of my lives on Facebook, was how a lot of times one of the consequences, positive consequence. Well, is consequences ever positive? Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's,
that could be.
yeah. Well, one of the things that comes with privilege is let's call it the luxury um, of basically a future orientation as opposed to a survival orientation. And things like meditating and eating well and saving money, all of that is oriented towards your future. And they've done, many studies that show that one of the most important uh, qualities that you can kind of develop that kind of tells you, from childhood, if you have this quality, it will predict success pretty reliably. And that's kind of being able to delay gratification. And I think that it's, people need, in order to go into the mindset of thinking about the future and just orienting all of their actions towards, okay, like, I want tomorrow to be better. I know, like, my future self will thank me for the actions I do now. You need a certain amount of safety in the now to go there, because if you don't feel safe in the now, then on a very real level, your body is freaking out and acting in such a way as basically it wants to just keep you alive. So, like, eat as much as you can and, like, react really strongly to things that are happening around you. So there isn't a lot of calm. There isn't a lot of, like, contemplation and kind of like ease in life. Everything is kind of like go, 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 a lot of stress. And that's one of the things that I notice the most. So, like, it's really funny because the neighborhood that I grew up in and spent a lot of time in here, we're one of, like, very few families of color, but in the past, like, it was a lot more diverse. And one of the things that I've always noticed about, like, white parents, like middle class, upper class white parents, is how calm they are with their kids.
Mm.
Like you see their kids like running around, climbing on stuff, and it's like, oh, Johnny, get like, come here, like, they're not freaking out, they're not like it's just like they understand, oh yeah, little Johnny's exploring, is doing his thing, and no big deal. Like, what is there to freak out about? Everything, we're safe. We're at a park, or we're at home on the street, but a little side street or whatever. Like, nobody's freaking out. Compare that to Latino moms, Black moms, like particularly the Dominican moms. Man, I mean, like I remember when my brother was little, my mom would freak out when my brother like ran off like at a supermarket, like even just like a few feet. If he started touching things, if he started kind of exploring on his own, she would just have a really, even then it felt like a really irrational response to what was happening. And I've always like just thought about that. Like, why does it seem like Dominican moms are always freaking out over like what should be a safe situation? A lot of people would feel that way, but to them it's not safe. It's not safe for kids to be rummaging around, exploring on their own. And I think things like that really have repercussions, as people grow up and how they see the world, how safe they feel to explore and make decisions and be themselves. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, when you were talking at first about um, the orientation around safety, I also wanted to just introduce, maybe this is something you already know, but I just wanted to introduce a little bit of neuroscience that I learned from reading Van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. Have you ever read that?
Yeah, I read that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he talks about how the amygdala is basically like it's like the fire alarm, but the fire alarm isn't meant to also distinguish why, is that smoke from the steak that's cooking on the stove, or is that smoke because the house is burning down? And that's kind of what survival mode does, is it takes the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus offline, uh, and really hijacks that system, so that, and that's how traumatized people walk through the world, especially if they don't get any kind of treatment or help, that any sense of threat just immediately sends them to that place of the house is on fire, and isn't able to make, because the hippocampus is the story maker and the prefrontal cortex is the thing that is more discerning. So those, there's no ability to make a story about, oh, that's just the steak on the stove that's cooking, and then I think when you have populations that have generational trauma or generationally have received different experiences about safety in the world and their sense of safety, then I think you walk with that kind of trauma and it affects you on that biological level. Your sense of safety is like the rubber band there is always pulled tight and there's not as much flexibility there, Yeah, so there's the trauma, the racial trauma, and then added on to that is the other layer of intergenerational also.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a trip, watching kind of reverse white flight, aka gentrification as we're seeing it right now. Because a lot of the reasons that white people escaped to the suburbs back in the 50s, and I don't know when it started, if it was the 40s or whatever, but it was to get away from conditions in the inner city, which you know, as more and more immigrants were coming into the United States, um, you know, there was maybe more noise, more crime, and
Mhm.
just more movement. And so these folks in kind of felt the need to, well, we need to move out to the peace and quiet of the suburbs. Now, I feel like that's a really important, um, I mean, to observe, just to observe, like what people, how people react to stress, right? Like their reaction was, I need to go somewhere quiet. I need to go somewhere safe. And
Mm.
I feel like, you know, you see that over and over again with people. The more that they acquire wealth, the more isolated they tend to want to become from moving out to the hills on the outskirts in the city, out by the beach, in the middle of the woods. Um, Eventually, if they get enough money in their own island, but like, you know, the idea is get away from people, get away from the influence of other people, and then build walls of protection around what you have. And that is very different kind of orientation towards life and others from people who don't have a lot of resources and privilege, let's say. Um,
Mhm.
and I feel
And
like,
mobility.
say again?
I just said and mobility, like
And,
mobility as part of that.
yeah. I don't know. I've always thought that was interesting. One of the things that I want, you know, I like to bring into the discussion is that I feel like one thing that, let's say, oppressed groups can do is to just start noticing some of these responses, right? And then, because there's intelligence there, right? It's like if you want a certain outcome, you do this. If you don't want safety, like, yeah, move to the middle of a city with a lot of traffic and a lot of pollution and whatever. And you know, maybe you're just wanting excitement and action. Great, move right into the middle of the city. Um, but if your kind of your goals are different, if you're trying to create safety, then what are the actions that people take to create safety? And one thing that I also always think about in relation to this is like, have you ever seen baby pigeons?
No, I don't think I have.
Yeah, and there's a reason for that. They protect their
Mm.
babies like they go through great lengths to hide those nests. And like
Mm.
there's pigeons everywhere in the city, and yet it's really hard to find like little pigeons because they're protected. And one
Mm.
of the things that I feel like is super important is to protect childhood.
Mm.
You know, we know that a child is malleable and a lot of things. Well, first of all, a child, those first 7 years really imprint them, right? I mean, I'm sure that's in that book too. The body keeps a score. But
Mhm.
but with a child, you know, you can work with a child like even like they're very malleable and in good and bad ways. But you know, dealing with a broken adult, it's much harder. It's much harder to kind of turn things around. And I think that one of the things that I see privileged people do is that they do everything they can to protect their kids and to give their kids that leg up. So whether it's, hey, like I don't care how much it costs, they're going to private school, or they're going to that fancy, the fancy school in that neighborhood. They're gonna be, busy with piano lessons and this or that. Like, we're not gonna let them just be out and about running around the neighborhood. Um, those are all the kind of little things that privilege affords people to be able to do. And I think that if they become a priority for a people and a culture, that you can find ways to, obviously maybe you won't be able to afford piano lessons for your kids every week, but there are ways that we can pull together as a community to make sure that the kids, at the very least, the kids are safe in marginalized communities.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. Van der Kolk, just referencing that book again, what he does say, and Peter Levine, I think, would agree with this, is that the most difficult to work with trauma is pre-verbal trauma. So before the age of 2 or 3, if you have trauma, it's incredibly difficult to work with, because again, the hippocampus is not online yet. Verbal parts of the brain, language parts of the brain are not online yet. So there's no ability to comprehend time, a story. There's no language or faculties to really develop a why is this happening, or a sense of, and I mean, we don't even develop the capacity to understand time until about the age of 8. So pre that, if there's a sense of unsafety, it's all the more terrifying if you can't see things in a linear fashion of there's an end to this, So I would definitely agree with that. The sense of brains, particularly, I would say pre-verbal, before the age of anywhere from like 3 to 5, and then also again a sensitive age at the age of 8. And our brains don't really fully develop; they're still very malleable up until our mid-20s. Obviously getting more and more resilient as we get older, but that early childhood, I would definitely agree also that there's a prioritization of children's well-being when there's privilege. And I'll also say there's something else that's occurring to me too. I read this a study about kids in a private school versus a group of kids that were in a public, like less well-funded school. And it was also about their outlooks on education and the learning process itself. And they talked about the wealthier, privileged kids had a more embodied sense of, I have the ability to impact my environment. Learning history is something that you can create. There was like a sense of agency, you could say, whereas with people who were in the less well-funded public school, there was more of a sense of history is something that has happened, and then you do what is expected of you to learn and recite that information, and that there's no sense of agency or reciprocity or relationship with history as something living. So I thought that was really interesting in terms of privilege and sense of identity in the world.
I mean, that's huge, for like, let's shifting the conversation maybe to like two communities in the United States that have a really really unfortunate history. Native Americans and African Americans, whenever, for some people, whenever you're talking about their history, it's like genocide or slavery. And I'm sure that really really create a lot of empowering feelings about what's possible for them and what they can do. And that's like a huge part of privilege, is essentially what society um, tells you that you can be and become. Um, because we do take our cues from like the people around us, right? When, especially when we're children, right? We don't just like, I don't think there's kids born who just innately know, oh, okay, I'm going to be a master composer. I'm sure maybe there's a rare few, but I think that those type of things are sort of you just kind of take it in by what you see, right? If like your dad is a scientist and he works at a lab, like being a scientist is not weird or foreign to you in any way. It's just like, oh yeah, like people can be scientists, like given, that's it. Your parents went to college, both of them. Not a big deal. Like, what's the big deal about going to college? That's just baseline expectation for what's going to happen when I grow up. I'm going to go to college. And it can be with you know, obviously with skills too. I mean, you see like in the African American community, like for instance, dancing is just like a very natural thing that you see your mom and your grandma and your brothers and sisters and cousins do, and it's not a big deal. It's like whatever, like you just dance. And like, I mean, I've worked in schools in inner city. It's amazing the bodily intelligence that some of these kids are showing at in third grade is higher than than sometimes I have as an adult who's been dancing for many years. Like their innate sense of aesthetics and movement, it's incredible. But that's kind of like those things were put, was just made easily accessible to them, like this is possible for you. And then you see these white kids who like cannot move a bone in their body. And it's just like, wow, like, you know, and you see it so clearly. There's nothing to do with like, oh, white people can't dance. It's just you didn't see examples of people dancing. Your parents didn't put you in dance school.
And I would say there's, just as we were mentioning earlier, that there's the intergenerational trauma that gets passed down epigenetically. There's also intergenerational resourcing that gets passed down, I think. I mean, all of that is in our genes, you know, all of that information. And that's sort of the most recent theoretical orientation that's like catching steam in psychology, is epigenetics. And it's not only relegated to the world of trauma, but just all that genetic information that includes resources or resourcing too. So I think of that when you talk about dance as sort of a mode of and capacity for healing or regeneration or connecting through generations.
Yeah. Dance is you know, I feel really privileged that dancing is something that was passed through my family and through my culture as something that is a given, and it's not something that I ever thought was not possible for me. Now, I think that what the types of things that, unfortunately, dancing doesn't pay bills. I don't know almost anyone. I don't know very many people that dance professionally that are set for life and don't have to worry about things, you know, like even some of the best dancers that I know, they are kind of struggling and also and kind of live in fear because they have this understanding that um, if their body fails, that's it. That there goes their livelihood. And when you're dancing at a high level, it's very easy for your body something to go wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so another huge part of privilege is sort of the cultural knowledge that is passed on to that is passed on like in the ways that people act, the ways that people talk, um, that make it so that they belong in a certain echelon of society, right? Like I don't really know what upper class. I haven't been part of the upper class of society, um, but uh, but there's a way in which there's a whole culture that they have, right? Ways where they go vacation, what kind of music they listen to, um, all these things that create this culture that you sort of like immediately know, okay, this person belongs here or this person does not belong here. And I think that what I've noticed with this is just comparing um, different immigrant groups or different ethnic groups and how they sort of interact with American culture and let's say the dominant culture. I think some groups look at assimilation and they say, "Oh yeah, of course. Like I'm here, America. Like America's like very entrepreneurial place. It's about making money and opportunity and things like that." And they just get on board. That's what they just come and do that. And then there's some people that sort of resist that culture, the dominant culture, for one reason or another. Um, in the case of like African Americans and Native Americans, the dominant culture has fucked them pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there comes a point where if you're in the position of less power, that attitude of kind of the the dominant culture is only hurting you more, um, because you need, in order to survive, you need to sort of adapt to just like for basic things, right? For getting jobs, knowing how to dress, how to speak, how to present yourself in such a way that you're deemed professional, right? And and obviously there's things about assimilation that are super messed up, and I'm not you have to know where to take a stand. I know, for instance, there's been a lot of talk about, for instance, like people being denied jobs because they have dreadlocks. Like that's outrageous. Like that's somebody's natural hair and that's how they want to wear it. Like should never be considered unprofessional to have your hair in dreadlocks. Um, and so yeah, I'm not talking about examples like that, but like more like, this used to be a debate back in the 90s where there was a debate between uh, Ebonics versus proper English. And some people were like, the way that Black folks speak English is like not grammatically correct, and we don't like it, and we think it's hurting you. And then there are other people who are like, no, this is like a distinct way that we speak, and and how we operate. So like accept us or whatever. Like we don't care if you don't like it. And in my experience, any and all Black people that are successful in that they I mean, I know of very few examples of people who don't do this. You have to learn how to code switch. You have to learn how to
Mm.
operate in the white Anglo dominant culture, and you also know how to just be yourself, however, whatever being yourself means. Um, you have to have that skill. Like it's totally necessary. Like, and I see certain cultures being able to do that. Like for instance, like a lot of my Asian American friends, it's like it's seamless. Like they just fit in because they can code switch so well and fit into in the office, any office culture or corporate office culture, right? And also fit in with their families when they need to. And I don't know, that's like something I think about a lot in relation to power and privilege.
Yeah, what occurs to me when you share that is that one, I think when I think about this in the context of a developmental map, I think it's a developmental skill to be able to recognize multiple contexts at once, or recognize when you're in different contexts that require that skill of code switching. And in the way that I also believe that trauma is a catalyst for growth, you know, that could be, you could say trauma, you could say collective trauma, you could say hardship, you
Mm-hmm.
know, in the way that it sort of like spurs that particular piece of development. You know, that the world, that each person, depending on their circumstances, whether it's a woman living in a patriarchal society or a Black person living in the dominant white society, um, you know, that sort of creates this impulse, or it necessitates, yeah, cultivating the ability to code switch. Um, and
Do you
I
ever find
wondered,
yourself? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say one more thing, and then I want to hear what you were going to say. I was just going to reflect back on what you were saying earlier about assimilation, because I think that at some points that it's important to have the knowledge of how to assimilate or to work on that as a skill. But also, I would say that gives you the ability to then uh, code switch or choose, at least know the territory that you're in so that you can push back and sort of be transformative, because you can't change a system if you don't know how the system works, or, you know, there's sort of this big and very loud impulse, I think, right now in the social justice world to just burn everything down. And I
Mm-hmm.
think um, that it sort of hinders the message that things need to change when you create these sort of either or dichotomies of either we accept the system as it is or we just burn the whole freaking thing to the ground and we start over. Whereas what I sort of hear in what you're saying and how I'm interpreting it is to know the system, um, in order to make more effective change, or in order to be really decisive about when to not assimilate, to be really conscious about when to not assimilate, and to make really conscious choices about that by knowing the system.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's sort of what I'm hearing, or how I'm interpreting also the piece about assimilation. It's not assimilation just for the sake of survival, but also assimilation for the sake of accumulating knowledge, you know, and possibly
Absolutely.
transforming it.
There's something, I mean, even with this whole conversation that happens around cultural appropriation, like I find most of it to be, I'm sorry, I think it's ridiculous, to be honest. Like 80% of it. There's definitely some pretty good examples of cultural appropriation that is just wrong and exploitive.
Like Victoria's Secret models wearing headdresses and lingerie down the modeling aisle or something like
I
that.
see that. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
but yeah.
yeah, like, I mean, the examples to me where cultural appropriation, um, like examples of cultural appropriation really gone wrong is like when somebody, let's say, somebody does 1 year of capoeira and then they want to start their own capoeira school in like, you know, Los Angeles, and like then they're teaching it like badly and profiting and making a bunch of money. Like that to me
Yeah.
is sort of like, okay, that's pretty egregious example of appropriating a culture and then propagating it in a way that is even harmful as well, when uh, you're not transmitting the purity of an art form or a product or whatever, and you're just kind of like giving a worse version of it. I think that is that's very harmful. But when we talk about
And you're benefiting materially from it and not
yeah, yeah,
benefiting,
exactly,
not giving.
and not giving back, not giving credits to
Yeah.
where it came from, those type of
Yeah.
things, right? But a lot of the examples, you know, for instance, some girl wearing hoop earrings. Oh, that's you're stealing style from Chicana girls. Like, come on, like that's just petty. It's just petty. And what bothers me the most though is that it ignores that we're always borrowing from each other, like everything. Like our entire culture is just a big sort of like soup of different, you know, everybody's given a little spice, little ingredient here and there. And that's why our culture is so beautiful. Um, that's literally, I mean, when I think about what are the things that I like about America, it's not, I mean, there's the list is getting smaller, but the thing that always comes back, that I always come back to is the diversity and the cultural richness that this country has. Nobody can take away the blues, jazz, um, you know, rock, everything. You know, both the contributions by African Americans, by your Euro Americans, white Americans, like everything about a lot of the things that the culture we've created. It's beautiful. I love it. And there's borrowing, there's communication, there's like people taking ideas from each other, and that's, we should never stop the flow of that occurring. Like that is how innovation happens. um so I feel like with when it comes to like connecting this back to assimilation, you know, what you're learning in when you assimilate, what you're learning is just basically like how the rules, the game that you're playing. Like if you're living in the United States 2020, you're playing a certain game. And I would say this game primarily involves the accumulation of wealth. If you're not playing the
Mm.
accumulation of wealth game, you're you're in a bad position. You're in a position where you matter less because you are valued less by society. You are not going to have basic resources to even do things like put food on your table, right? Put calories in your body so that you can even just do daily activities. Like it's going to affect every single part of your existence. So essentially, like if an immigrant comes here, and you can say all you want about capitalism is evil and this or that, but like at the end of the day, that is the game that we're playing in order to survive. If you're not playing that game, I feel bad for what future you have, because oh, Ellie dropped out. Just wait for her to come back.
Yeah.
You back? Can you hear me?
Okay. I think it's working again. I'm just waiting for your video to come up. I can hear you. I'm just waiting for your video to come up.
Okay.
Sorry, my internet connection is kind of shoddy at the time. Everybody wants to get on in a small town. Okay, I can hear you.
You can
Yeah,
see me now?
basically saying capitalism. You can hear me now. Yeah.
Yeah, you sound a little bit choppy now. And I still don't have visual of you.
Okay, let's wait for it to catch up for a moment. Make sure I'm out of.
Try turning your camera on and
Can you
off.
see me now?
Nope.
Oh, okay, can you hear me now? Or see me
Yep.
now?
I see
Okay.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
suddenly it's much better quality.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so you were saying basically capitalism. People may say that capitalism is evil, but at the end of the day, it's kind of what is in a practical way, sort of mobilizing.
It's the game we're playing. It's the
Yeah.
game we're in. Um, and the thing that's a part of me is in agreement with a part of me is in line with like the let's destroy and recreate, right? Um, a bigger part of me doesn't think that that's really a smart thing to do, and I'll tell you why. It basically the basic idea is this: order is very easy to destroy, but very, very hard to create, right? I can take hours and hours building a sand sculpture, and literally a dog can just like jump on it, or I'll fall over and it's gone, the whole damn thing. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's wise to so ease, and especially I'm very skeptical of the types of people usually that are calling for destroying and everything, because these are not, sometimes it's not really people who are creators and generative building people, you know. They're just people that want to see shit burn. And
And if I could just say one thing about it, and
yeah.
sorry to interrupt, it just got me thinking that you can have what Ken Wilber would say about this from an integral lens is that you can have trans-rational people or essentially, or post-conventional people. So post-conventional people, people at later developmental stages that are creating sort of the platform for change. And you can have pre-conventional people that are also on board with and honestly, you know, marching for the changes. But when you have post-conventional people, they might be a little more nuanced in what they actually mean when they say something like defund the police or abolish ICE. And then when you have pre-conventional people mix in with that, then they might have just less nuance, or they might be more militant about it, which is where you get these great ideas that are totally overtaken by people who just want to tear the system apart instead of do the transformative work that is actually going to make it better, that is actually almost like creating the scaffolding for the change that everybody's calling for.
Yeah.
But then a lot of the sort of the military of people that are backing it maybe don't have that kind of nuance or have that kind of clarity about what is actually meant when they say things like abolish ICE or defund the police.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, you know, to me, destruction, like when if we're talking about destruction literally of a system or of a person, that's like the very last resort, right? That's destruction is when you kill somebody, that's the ultimate way to say to somebody that they don't matter. Right? You matter so little to me that I will literally just take your life right now and you cease to exist in this world. Okay? That is, yeah, I don't want to get to that point ever in anything if I can avoid it. People, destruction is not a natural part of life. Death is, though. And normally people die in hospice, in hospitals and whatever, and they go into hospice. There's a process of dying. And there's certain things in our world, like systems and people, and let's talk about capitalism, right? I think it's a dying system. It's a system that we should put into a hospice home, and and basically send some nice nurses and
gather all the grandchildren around,
exactly.
say goodbye.
Yeah, that's how I feel we should be treating this, instead of like, let's kill grandma, she was a bitch anyways. Like, and the other part of wanting to destroy, especially something like capitalism, is like, man, how some people more than others, but like I would say most of us have benefited a lot from this system, especially if you live in this country. So there's a deep ungratefulness if you're just kind of thinking about the negatives, right? So yeah, those are the kind of reasons that I tend not to go into the extremes of destroying systems, destroying people, kill all Nazis, punch Nazis, do this or that to people I don't like. It's just perpetuating the idea of people and systems, things not mattering. And when you give off that energy is going to be reciprocated to you by someone at some point.
Yeah, I would, that brings up two things. And the first one is, I think the reason that people have such a, like when I think of this human development map that I use by stages, it was integral informed and created by Kimbarta and Terrio Fallon. And they basically, this map, like you could probably place whole entire systems at various places on this map. But there's this idea that whenever we go from one stage into another, Ken Wilber came up with this sort of phrasing around it, I believe, But he talks about when we move from one stage into another, we usually have an allergy to the stage that we just came from.
Yeah.
Just like we were talking the other day about how when we're teenagers and we're moving out of the house, we want to differentiate from our parents, from where we just came from. Or when we move from one stage into another, we want to differentiate. And I think sometimes that there's an allergy can really denote an aggression to I'm not that. I don't like that. I don't want that. People that move out of the church from those organizations into new phases of development, often you'll find people are really anti-church. They're really anti-religious organizations, because there's a huge allergy that is actually a part of the development because of it necessitates needing to differentiate. And at the same time, I think even that has its limitations to how violent basically that can get. And I think as a society, we really have to hold that there's a health to differentiating, but that as a society, we hold sort of the ethical imperative of being aware of violence, whether it's this perpetuated by the system, like we see now, sort of racially bias in police and sort of mass murder of a lot of people of color. And then also when it comes to, moving into a new system, that we don't become militant about that also. And like you were saying, having that reciprocated by the system, so I think it's important to really be clear in sort of be cleaning up our shadows as we go, so that we aren't just reciprocating between systems all of that violence that was sown into our sort of earlier roots as a country. And so I also agree. I mean, that reminds me, I also agree that I don't think that we'll really be able to create systems that are in health until we really do look at the roots of what this country was founded on, which was a lot of stolen labor, a lot of stolen land. And until we sort of clean up those shadows, or at least acknowledge them and work with that in a really honest way, that I think it will be hard to create a system.
Yeah. And stolen
that is
and
in
discarded
health.
culture.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. As part of I think that is absolutely part of wealth.
Yeah. That culture, culture is really, it's a glue that holds people together, societies together. It's the mechanism by which you kind of perpetuate life, the values of your people. So much information comes from culture, and it's not something that once a culture. I mean, we even have a term for it. We have genocide of people, but you can also have cultural genocide, which is also just as bad as well. And it's, to me, kind of bringing conversation back a little bit to this whole thing about white privilege. One of the things that I notice happens a lot in the social justice world is that there is sort of like a demand for, okay, so what are you going to do now, white people? What are you going to do? Are you going to be like allies? Are you going to stick, renounce your privilege and this or that, or acknowledge your privilege first, and then kind of use your privilege to help others, right? Come up. And the problem with that, it's not that there's a problem with that. It's that it's what's not being said to me that is the problem. What doesn't get equal voicing is how are we, the people who are oppressed, going to, like, what are we going to do? And that question is a lot more important, I think, because what you can do is a lot more within your power, and what others can do, what white people can do, is not. Right? You can ask somebody to change their behavior. Don't do this, please. But like ultimately, you don't really have control of what other people do. And what makes matters worse is that when you are in a position of lower status, since you literally, society makes it so that you matter less, you have less value, what's in it for a group that has more value to do anything for you? Like what's in it for them? And I think you have to ask that. Like, you have to be very like honest in your assessments of these things. Like, why should people try to change and eradicate a system that is giving them an advantage? Something like white supremacy. You have to make that case. I think you can make a very strong case that white supremacy is hurting everyone. It's hurting the planet and everything. But I don't hear the case really being made very often, because I feel like it's more, what I hear more than anything is like, well, it's hurting us, so like then you have to stop it. And it's like, okay, it's cool, but like I mean, I imagine some people probably don't say this out loud, but they're like, okay, but why should I like stop? Why should I stop a system that's benefiting me? And so I think that it's much more useful for people, for groups, to think about what can be changed, what can be done on an insular level and within a group, before you're asking others to make changes to, or simultaneously, but they just have to both be happening. Because otherwise, I feel like it becomes part of this game, this dynamic that often, in all conflicts, right, whether we're talking about a divorce or a fight between two kids, it's you're wrong, you're everything that's wrong about this situation, and I'm right. And you're the one that has a problem, not me. And even there's almost no situation, very few situations where that's true. There's very few situations where a person is literally a helpless victim and somebody else is just acting upon them, and they're sort of like, child abuse of an adult to a small child, right? You can't, that's a victim. But other than that, usually there's two sides, and there's two different parties engaging in behavior that is counterproductive to solving the problem. And both sides have to be able to talk honestly and candidly and say, this is what I think is happening. Okay, this is what I think is happening. This is how I feel. Making it about how, not accusing, right? This is like the nonviolent communication component that I wish came more into our social justice world, about how I feel, what I'm experiencing, rather than you're this. And I feel like that takes a certain level of vulnerability, right? To admit, like, this and this hurts me. I feel this and this when people do this, as opposed to the language of like, you're an asshole, you're fucking you did this and that. That does not show vulnerability. That just shows that you want to hurt the other person, like they hurt you. And as soon as you do that, the dynamic that you create is a defensive one, where the other person is just like, okay, well, time to fight. And they get the shield up, they got their sword. So
Yeah. Can I
yeah, go
add
ahead.
something to it? Because that was a really rich piece. And so I think this is when it's really helpful to have a map of human development, because it's easy to try to divide it into camps of, like Black Lives Matter, for example, right? There's like a whole array of intentions or ideologies or, perspectives at play. And so it's nice to also recognize, like, oh, okay, within that spectrum, there's also a lot of human development, like different stages of development that are being birthed there, So there's the sort of lateral move of gathering everybody under the umbrella, but then there's also tiers of vertical development and leadership that are emerging also. And then it's like, and then that can be really helpful, because then you think, where are they talking from and who are they talking to, which is a lot easier to get clear about, rather than trying to say Black Lives Matter has a singular agenda that is clear. But it's, if you're operating from multiple tiers of leadership that are at different stages of development, I think that's when it sometimes gets really unclear. Like, you have some groups that are, I think you just did a really good job of naming some of the ways that some of the places that they speak from, and even some of the wounds that they speak from, right? If we were speaking from a sort of Jungian sense of the wounds and like reciprocating the hurt that is felt, I think that happens a lot sometimes when speaking to somebody who hurt you, or speaking from that place of hurt. I think there can be the desire to reciprocate the hurt, and so then you have sometimes the sort of shoe is on the other foot, and you want the oppressor to feel what it's like to feel oppressed.
Yeah, that's a lot of that. It's a lot of that.
Yeah. So that occurs to me also of, I think there's some wisdom in what you're saying about being really conscious about what are our intentions when we're speaking to whoever that other may be. Am I wanting them to feel the way that I have been, or am I truly feeling vulnerable? Which I think again circles back to, am I in survival mode? Because vulnerability and connection, it's really hard to operate in vulnerability if we're in survival mode. Connection and vulnerability really come from feeling centered and feeling like all pistons are sort of firing in our brain, prefrontal cortex engaged. What's that?
I said in safe.
And safe. Totally.
I mean, how many, I don't know if I'm sure you've gone to workshops and things like that where, these weekend workshops where people are getting vulnerable within like 1 or 2 days. And the very first thing that happens is, you're usually doing some kind of team building games and activities to build that sense of like camaraderie and safety before you um, before you get vulnerable and share, your deep dark secrets and your fears and concerns.
Mm.
That's super important. And
Mm.
yeah, I feel like it's an important thing that to create, I think, in these times. Um, and I don't see, yeah, yeah, I'll just say that. I just think that's important to create that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a sense of something you're pointing out is basically creating relationship, and I sort of, when you were saying earlier, what does the other benefit from liberating other groups or from utilizing their own privilege? And I thought about that a lot in different contexts also. For example, I think that men really suffer from patriarchal notions around toxic masculinity. And I think that there's a lot of like personal ways that they would benefit. And I've definitely spent time sharing my views with men or coaching men, or now gaining a therapy degree to be able to talk to both genders about what validating experience and validating emotions and validating a space, creating a validating space for all aspects of self to emerge. And there's sort of another aim there is not just what is it worth to you, but also how do we create healthy relationship out of this? Not just it's like more than transaction in a way of you do this for me and I'll do this for you. There's also the sense of what other things can emerge from this once we're in relationship, because there are certain barriers to being in relationship that's reciprocal, that's honest, that's fair, that is just. So once those barriers are removed, how can we be in relationship and benefit from that relationship in more than a sort of transactional sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that definitely is the end goal rather than just the transactional. But transactional component is important to some people and in certain situations. Say,
Totally agree. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and again, I mean, we're coming from like a capitalist society, and if that's sort of the center of gravity, so to speak, of our consciousness, if we're operating a lot of times from that place, then it makes a lot of sense to me that things would be explained on that level, or things would make sense on that level, or things would be valued on that level of transaction, and yeah, and why it would need to be framed that way.
yeah, because one of the things that we're experiencing now with the movement to kind of reform policing and kind of resurgence of Black Lives Matters, we're seeing how corporations like Amazon are behind this movement, and it seems like everybody. I mean, I'm getting messages from every freaking mailing list that I'm a part of, telling me how much they care about Black lives and this or that. And I think that more than anything, to this should serve as proof to people that identity politics is like a very easy uh, it's a softball, it's an underhanded toss to these people. They can play this game all day, and let's make no mistake, the elite class in this country are robbing us blind. They are they are
Yeah.
The corruption and the systems of impunity that they have created are at the root of all the problems that we're seeing here.
Mm-hmm.
Even slavery, even the original sin of slavery it was not everyone. It was mostly, big elite plantation owning families that had most of the slaves. Okay. The elite have been at this game for a very long time, benefiting off of the labor, the hard work, the sacrifice of working class people. And
Mm-hmm.
what they will not participate in is in the real narrative that scares them, which is the narrative of real wealth distribution, the narrative that shows exactly what needs to happen on the economic level for things to get better. That is an actual threat to them. Identity politics, yeah, they'll hire, I'm sure Raytheon is capable of hiring a woman of color CEO to build their fucking bombs and their warp, their guided missile systems to bomb other countries. They'll be happy to, if they find a black woman that can do the job, they'll hire her, okay, to fill their diversity
Mm-hmm.
quotas. Um, the game, again, the game that we're playing in this country is the money making game. If you're not, that's it. I mean, I don't know what else to say. That is the game. And until we, I don't know what integral theory says about this this stage, but like until we evolve from this stage as a collective, you have to just know that is what's happening, and operate in such a way that you are protecting yourself or taking advantage of that game that's being played.
Yeah. I think that, if we were looking at it from an integral perspective, how I might interpret that with that lens would be something like we've been seeing a shift into what spiral dynamics might refer to as green, or what stages would refer to as 4.0. So away from capitalist structures into things that entertain the notion of like you were saying, wealth distribution, things that really call for more lateral leadership instead of prioritizing hierarchies as we've done for a long time. Things that value that have values, like, then money isn't king when we move out of this. Then it's values like justice, equality, peace, things like this, where we sort of see the shadows starting to creep up, which I think are an inherent part of learning any stage, is going through the growing pains of what are the shadows. So I'm not saying this only as a criticism, as in we should try to, that we're not going to be able to fumble through this. I think we have to fumble through the growing pains. That is green or 4.0. Or the sort of social justice movement that we're seeing. And I would say that includes being militant about our values. being really preaching tolerance, but being really intolerant of people that have not caught up with our way of seeing things, or our perception and the way that we view things. So finding it within us to begin to learn to embody the things that we really want to, that we preach, that we want to, the ways that we want to transform the world, begin to embody them as well, and not just insist that everybody get on board. And if you see it differently, then you must be at an earlier developmental stage.
To the gulag.
You know? What's that?
I said to the gulag. If you
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's sort of that paradox that I think is happening, that we see playing out in the social justice movement. And it's not a criticism that is denying the value of the social justice movement, because I think there are way more good things than there are critiques to be made. And I think it's a shadow that we just have to be aware of. You know, there's a lot of, I think it's humorous. There's a lot of sort of, I think that memes poking fun at that right now are the ones that are saying eat the rich, you know? So it's like kind of poking fun at like this whole paradigm shift, and then, you know, enacting violence. Century. So, you know, that's, go ahead.
Cut off for a second.
Go ahead.
I said your sound cut off for a second, but I think last thing I heard was eat the rich, making fun of. Anyways.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that it's sort of this twist on, it's this humorous twist on enacting violence on those who have been enactors of violence for centuries even. So yeah, I just am appreciating sort of the it seems like a humorous reflection on that shadow of 4.0, of green, of this sort of transition that we're seeing. But yeah, I would say that sort of the biggest thing to be aware of is the paradox of the things that they're preaching, to learn to really embody them, and to learn, you know, 4.0, this transition we're seeing, really one of the values I would say is respect for everybody. But then you see social justice, people, you know, they call them social justice warriors, right? Who just go out there and they can be so violent with their words. We can be so violent. Sometimes, you know, I feel really caught up in that sort of vitriol of how do they not see that respect for everyone is a human right? And I think we can really be swept up in that wave of not embodying the very thing that we're trying to sort of build into a transformation in the world, and a transformation in the system.
Yeah. I mean, the example you gave earlier, you know, about ex-Christian who leaves Christianity and then, you know, kind of becomes allergic to Christianity after they leave. I mean, that was me pretty much. I was a fundamentalist Christian in my youth, and once I left, whenever I talked about Christianity, like could just feel it's just like hate, and like I was just spewing out like all of this like anger that I had, and ultimately I realized that it was just a lot of anger even towards myself for having believed this stuff and having been that person, you know. And took a long time for me to like process that. Even now, if I talk about Christianity, it's hard. I have to catch myself constantly to make sure I'm not going into that angry place, and that I'm speaking from a place of love, and I'm speaking from a place of compassion and understanding, because that's, you know, if I'm I guess I am still trying to convert people, but now I'm trying to just convert them to believing in themselves and to being
Mm.
kinder humans, and just more respectful of the planet, more respectful of each other, right? And in order for me to do that, I have to embody that. If I'm going around just shit talking Christians, that's not going to convert anybody. Um,
Yeah.
and that's, I hope the lesson that I hope that one of the things that happens as we see this change happen is that there's an acceleration in the speed at which we learn our lessons, that we don't have to go through years and years of making the same fucking mistakes in order to grow out of certain stages. Like, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's necessary to go through the years and years, I don't know, but I'm hoping that it's not, and that people can learn
Yeah.
quickly. Because yeah, things are getting pretty serious over here. And yeah, I feel like so what, one of the things I worry about, for instance, is like other countries, as they're developing and kind of industrializing, that they're gonna become like the United States and make the same mistakes. Like the world literally cannot, the planet cannot afford for there to be one or two more United States, like making the mistakes on the same scale that we are. Like it can't. Um, so we have to start learning from other people's mistakes more quickly if we want to survive, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I disagree with what you just said, that the world cannot afford kind of this social experiment. And I think that there's an imperative there to develop much quicker and hopefully be able to learn from our mistakes. And there's a question there inside what you're saying, which is what is the guiding force to our individual development, and what is the guiding force to our collective development? Because some of us, it takes 10 years to learn the lesson that someone else, it took them 5 years or 2 years. And I don't know kind of what that imperative is. I will say, once we get later into our development, I'd say the one of the most profound things um, that can move us through development is being aware of our projections, um, or being aware of projections, period. Um, and there are different ways that that can be enacted. For example, like concrete projections would be, my boss tells this story when she's teaching about projection, and she'll say she went over to a friend's house to help her clean and get ready for a party. And she was like, oh my God, this woman's cabinets are filthy. It's so gross, and she's like helping her clean, like the whole time silently judging how filthy her cabinets are. And then she went home and she looked at her cabinets and realized they were filthy and that she just hadn't been able to see because she had been so used to it. So I think that would be an example of a concrete projection. And I think so even early on, it's possible to be able to reflect on ourselves and see what our own projections are about other people. And then, as we were just saying, about people in the social justice movement, preaching tolerance, but then being intolerant, there's the possibility there to recognize, oh, I'm wanting them to be tolerant with me, but I'm not able to be tolerant with them. um, and it's only then that we'll be able to move on um, to the next phase of development, when we sort of faced our own projections that sort of speeds up development. That, and recognizing, for example, religion is a really good example. If we recognize the stage before, how it helped us, we heal our allergy to the stage before. Or for example, religion, we realize, okay, I recognize the value that had for me at that time in that place, or at least I'm healing my allergy to it, and I'm not antagonized by it anymore. That's what allows us to like keep moving forward. And so I'm thinking about that as we're talking on a collective scale, because we're talking about this big social experiment that took a lot of material resources. And I'm thinking, it's possible too, as we grow up through the stages, for our shadows to grow up with us. They become sneakier, but they get more sophisticated, and they can stay with you. Like, you can have someone who is so developed and they have such mental acuity that they can outsmart anyone who tries to point out their shadow. They can outsmart themselves, or the shadow can outsmart everybody. So it's possible for the shadows to grow up with us too. But I think if we're able to resolve that and look at that in terms of our collective shadow, like we were saying, looking at the roots of this country, looking at, slavery, looking at the stolen land, intellectual wealth, physical wealth, those things. I think if we're able to clean up our shadows, that would be, I think, save a lot of resources, because I think this sort of grab for material wealth is also coming from this existential crisis that our country is in as well.
Mm.
I definitely see them as interrelated, yeah.
Mm. Yeah. What do you think about, should we start wrapping up?
I think we could wind down for the day and then maybe revisit
Yeah.
in another conversation, and just yeah.
My body's like pretty uncomfortable now. I'm like too much sitting for today.
Yeah, even with your new ergonomic rocking chair.
Yeah. No, it's how I'm noticing already. It's helping me sit up straighter, and having to use my core. And the great thing is that it's easier to change how I'm sitting in it. Like full on, like kneeling on it, which would look like this, to kind of just laying back on it. I could turn it around and sit this way. So
right on.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we'll just wind down for the day, and then we can revisit whatever questions or residual thoughts come up for next time. What do you think?
Yeah, this was a lot. Covered a lot of ground.
Why don't I stop the recording and we can debrief a little bit if you want?
Okay.